In my previous video, Why Virtua Fighter is More Important Than Tekken, I argued that the significance of Virtua Fighter overshadows that of Tekken based on three main considerations. First, that Virtua Fighter single-handedly invented the 3D fighting game genre and also established many enduring tropes such as air juggling, ring outs, and a de-emphasis on projectile attacks. Second, by influencing the progression of the gaming industry as a whole, through serving as the inspiration for console architects to transition in earnest toward a market focused primarily on games that utilized 3D technology, as well as providing the impetus for video game designers to reinvigorate and pioneer the action-adventure, first-person shooter, and open-world exploration genres. And third, by stating that Virtua Fighter's gameplay design remains to this day as the most technical, complex, balanced, and in-depth 3D fighting game franchise of all time. This last point was something that I previously considered to be uncontroversial, so I neglected to provide specific examples contrasting the depth between Virtua Fighter and Tekken. Instead, I made a vague analogy that failed to satisfy many viewers who were not willing to accept the immense depth of Virtua Fighter games as something that could be taken for granted. The amount of feedback I received from devoted members of the fighting game community caught me a bit off guard, and I landed myself more than a little ire from fans of the Tekken series. Despite this, many commenters were extremely helpful in providing constructive feedback and helped me to quickly realize what a waste it would be to miss an opportunity to go into some specifics comparing the depth between these two great franchises. However, to provide a fully detailed and exhaustive, in-depth treatment of either series' fundamental mechanics, strategies, and meta-game theory would require several videos, each multiple hours in length. That is something that is beyond my available time and resources to create. So this examination will suffice it to speak mostly in general terms, with a few specific examples and insights to help convey the basic gist of the concepts provided. If you would like a more detailed analysis of Virtua Fighter's game design and strategy, with frame data and input displays, I recommend a 2-hour and 40-minute video by Mr. EXDandyJ that covers the basics of Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown. Sega of America also has a useful series of videos that serves as a tutorial for reaching high-level play in Final Showdown. For Tekken, I recommend checking out some of That Blasted Salami's videos. I will leave links in the description below.
Knock yourself out.
To those who have waited patiently for this installment and anyone else stopping by, I hope you enjoy the video. It's a lot of fun to be able to talk about these amazing games with people who are so passionate about them. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
You'll enjoy this, trust me. Ready?
To begin with, it is fair to ask, what is depth in the first place? In respect to fighting games, many wonder whether depth is something that can be objectively evaluated at all. If depth is merely a subjective concept, then analyzing Virtua Fighter and Tekken from this approach would only result in superficial chest beating without ever reaching a clear resolution on the subject. Fortunately, I feel that I can offer a definition that will aid in the attempt to treat depth as a quantifiable measurement. Some have noted that balance is an important component of any truly deep fighting game. However, balance itself is not enough to provide a deep gameplay experience. Imagine a fighting game in which there is only one playable character. Every match in this game would result in a mirror match, and, since competing players would have the exact same character with all the same moves, this would technically be a perfectly balanced game. However, a game such as this would be shallow, as it would lack a variety of characters, fighting styles, and a diverse list of characters' moves and abilities. A game's complexity, the total number of strategies available for a player to achieve an objective, is also a crucial aspect taken into account when considering the depth of a game. Variety and complexity, then, account for how many options a game offers its players. These factors, as with balance, also fail to capture the essence of depth in themselves. This becomes particularly clear when examining the merits of a game from a competitive perspective. Take, for example, the highly esteemed Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This classic boasts an enormous roster with addictive gameplay that provides for hundreds of possible combinations for team-ups, character moves, and strategies. However, this game famously lacks balance, as any player wanting to get into the competitive scene is relegated to the selection of about 12 or so optimized teams, when the game itself appears to offer a huge combinatorial permutation of possible options on the surface. This is why variety and gameplay complexity are not enough to create a truly deep fighting game if the options they provide for a player are merely false choices at a competitive level. A deep game should have a large number of viable strategies for victory, where the number of choices are not only plentiful, but also optimal and effective. Game depth, then, can be thought of as the intersection between variety and balance, between complexity and optimal gameplay. A deep game needs to offer true choice, a large number of effective characters, command inputs, and viable strategies available to a player at any given moment. Based on this definition, Tekken is an undeniably deep game, and an intensely entertaining one at that. Tekken is a series that I enjoy quite a lot, and Tekken 7 is the most fun I've had playing a fighting game in a long time. I can sit and watch slow motion compilations for hours.
Okay, so here were my options. A. Quickly duck sideways, dodge the claw, then take him out with his spinning back kick. Or B. Take the claw in the face, then roll on the ground and die. Should have gone with A.
Tekken has a large roster of diverse characters with a variety of fighting styles and personalities. It is deservedly considered to be one of the greatest fighting game franchises of all time, and is as fun to play for new players as it is for the pros. It makes excellent use of motion as the core of its gameplay. Intermediate to high-level players incorporate the use of wave dashing and dash canceling to maneuver themselves into dominant positions or to escape from devastating beatdowns. Rage arts add a layer of strategy to the game, and even though rage drives have garnered a mixed response from some fans, they do keep players on their toes. Tekken at its core is a game about movement. One uses movement through 3D space to feel out an opponent in order to bait them into an attack or a position in which they can be punished. The highest level players are able to manipulate the movement engine of the game with techniques like the Korean backdash and incorporate the use of just frame moves that make for some really exciting stuff. Gameplay in Tekken has a defensive nature that creates an incentive for turtling and poking for openings in an opponent's defenses. This in itself is not a bad thing, but it can result in defensive characters like Jack showing up a lot in high-ranking competitive matches, which can tend to bore some casual observers. Tekken's roster of characters is decently balanced, but there are some characters that get passed over for others when it comes to the competitive scene. This is where the limitations of Tekken's depth begin to show themselves. There are some characters, like the Bears for example, that just aren't considered to be as beneficial to use in high-level matches as other characters. This makes counterpicking a legitimate strategy for victory, which bothers me a tad because this means that some players are put at a disadvantage simply for character choice rather than their lack of skill. Also, as good as Tekken's game design is, there is a bit of jank here and there that results in weird and unfair situations occurring from time to time.
What? What the fuck is going on? I couldn't move it. What?
The Crush system is another example of the impressive complexity of Tekken's gameplay. This system employs the use of specific high and low attacks that are rendered immune to certain types of moves. In practice, high crushes are immune to damage from high attacks, and low crushes are immune to low attacks. Utilizing these attacks can result in some strange-looking situations that are great for catching an opponent off guard. Mid-crushing does not technically exist, but there are some special mids that can be low-crushed. The fact that there is not a hard and fast rule for this can frustrate some players by making them feel that Tekken's rules are not as consistent or logically intuitive as they perhaps ought to be. Also, while the number of inputs for each character's move list are considerable, More than a few of these are rendered as less than useful at the competitive level. An example of this is made evident by inputs such as the 10-hit string combos, many of which are easy to block or avoid and are thus unlikely to be of any effect against more seasoned players. As one delves deeper into high-level play, a number of false choices begin to manifest themselves, which does significantly diminish the overall depth of the game. Many fans claim that Virtua Fighter boasts the deepest and most technical gameplay of all fighting games. Others, who are less familiar with the franchise, find themselves perplexed, if not put off, by the movement and controls of this series that come across as stiff and lacking in fluidity compared to other 3D fighters. This misunderstanding stems from the fact that button mashing in Virtua Fighter will get you absolutely nowhere. Even games as deep and complex as Tekken allow beginners to achieve some limited results against intermediate players by employing the practice of mashing buttons randomly.
Potato. Mashed potatoes.
Gameplay fluidity in Virtua Fighter is present at higher levels of play. As the more skilled the players are, the smoother and more dynamic the gameplay becomes. Virtua Fighter's true complexity and depth are veiled behind its simplicity. As you progress in ability, you come to realize part of what makes the game so unique is how strongly it emphasizes the fundamentals of its fighting system. We start with the foundation of rock, paper, scissors. In Virtua Fighter, strikes beat throws, guards beat strikes, and throws beat guarding. Since you need a standing guard to block a mid-attack, to protect yourself from a mid-attack throw mix-up, you can employ the use of the all-important fuzzy guard. If a mid-attack gets past your guard, you can still protect yourself from a throw by performing a crouching dash fuzzy guard. However, your opponent can use the guard button to delay an attack or throw in order to beat your fuzzy guard. If you are struck by a counter hit, you can't duck in time to avoid a throw, so you perform an evade throw escape by tapping up or down with punch plus guard. Or, you could employ the throw escape guard, which allows you to buffer the guard button in order to defend against an attack following the throw escape depending on whether you are able to read your opponent's next attack. Another technique that adds to Virtua Fighter's complexity is that of the sabaki. This is an attack that appears normal on the surface, but has the special property of being able to cleanly win an exchange against a certain type of attack. Each of these concepts is simple to understand, but as layer upon layer of strategy is added, you begin to get a glimpse into what makes Virtua Fighter so special in terms of complexity, and we've only barely scratched the surface. The roster is of average size, admittedly, compared to many popular fighting franchises, but the characters have diverse fighting styles and sizable move lists, with hardly anything in them that is not useful on the competitive level. In fact, the unique character moves, coupled with the universal concepts we briefly touched on, make Virtua Fighter an incredibly balanced game, as each of its characters is a valid selection for optimal tournament play. As mentioned earlier, picking a character to counter your opponent's choice is a legitimately effective strategy in Tekken, but this is not the case in Virtua Fighter. Part of what makes this game so special is the sheer amount of viable strategies available to a player at any given moment, with any character, in any given situation. More than most other games, Virtua Fighter requires you to fight against your human opponents by getting inside their heads. Everything about Virtua Fighter, from its movement system to its offensive and defensive mechanics, is about yomi. The term yomi is a Japanese word that is used to convey the idea of being able to know the mind of an opponent in such a way that you are able to either read and anticipate their actions or control them in such a way that you know their next move. Yomi as a concept is epitomized in Virtua Fighter because the player is not limited to a specific set of choices based on the selection of a specific character. This game requires you to constantly adapt your playstyle and tendencies, as learning one specific string of combos and doing them over and over again will get you destroyed in high-level games. It has been noted by professionals that part of the magic of Virtua Fighter is that every competitor can play a character uniquely from anyone else because various playstyles can make the same character look completely different. Each match is all about facing your opponent, not so much your opponent's character. Many have claimed that Virtua Fighter is overly complex and thus too difficult for the majority of fighting game enthusiasts to get into. This is a misconception, as the mechanics and command inputs of the game are actually quite simple to grasp and not overly difficult to execute. What is difficult is being able to react fast enough to have an effective response to situations that change each second. Unlike most fighting games that reveal their limitations in high-level play, Virtua Fighter only becomes more fluid, more complex, and more in-depth as the skill of its players increase. When other fighting games limit players at a competitive level, Virtua Fighter truly begins to open up the full extent of its possibilities. Based on the criteria given previously, Virtua Fighter is deeper than Tekken because it has greater balance, more consistent rules, a greater number of viable options available to the player, and overall fewer false choices than that of other fighting game franchises. And so what? Does that mean that Virtua Fighter is better and more fun and enjoyable than Tekken? Not necessarily. Please understand that I am not trying to belittle Tekken in any way, or claim that one game is objectively better than the other. It all depends on the personal tastes of the player and what that player is looking for in a fighting game. I don't think that Tekken is even trying to be as deep of a game as Virtua Fighter in the first place. Tekken is flashy, over-the-top, silly fun with great characters and rewarding gameplay that can be enjoyed for months or even years. Both games are different types of fighting experiences that appeal to different subgroups of gamers. My purpose in comparing Virtua Fighter's depth to that of Tekken's is merely to demonstrate the importance of the Virtua Fighter franchise to the fighting game genre and the gaming industry as a whole. As Yoshinori Ono, producer of Street Fighter IV, once said, "The way the game requires players to build on their attacks to create an offensive flow really shows how deep Virtua Fighter is. It's no exaggeration to say that Virtua Fighter is the game by which all fighting games are measured." Virtua Fighter's depth is just one of the aspects that make it the most important 3D fighter of all time. I know that I barely scratched the surface of both games' intricacies, but I hope I did a better job this time of giving some specific reasons for why Virtua Fighter has a depth that is unmatched, even by the likes of worthy adversaries like Tekken. And even if you still disagree with me, I hope we can still be friends. Maybe we could even play a match sometime. With that, I'm going to bring this video to a close. Please make sure to be safe wherever you are out there, and take care until I see you again in the next video.